Hello and welcome to Stop Now, where we stop, listen, and share. My co-host today is Nate Milton. How are you, Nate?
I am great, Amanda. It is good to be here with you again. Ultimate Nate is in the building. That's a callback to a previous episode of this podcast, but I'm doing great this week. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm glad and excited to be speaking with Stephen Morse today. Stephen, will you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, please?
It's great to be here. So my name is Dr. Stephen Morse. I'm from all on the other side of the world, from Sydney, Australia, and I run my own consultancy. We work with organizations, both large and small, to help them to address issues around human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, and what we call a big term called modern slavery, which bundles that all together. That's our game.
Oh, okay. How long have you been doing that line of work?
I've been in this space now for just over 12 years. My company is 5 years old. So we've been focusing on addressing the issue from a demand side. So looking at those who buy products, who are sort of at the top of the supply chain. We've been doing that now for 5 years. But overall, I've been in this space for 12 years, working at different levels. Before that, working at the grassroots, working more, looking at how people are impacted and affected by this issue.
And I love that you kind of look at it from that aspect, Dr. Morse, because a lot of times here on this show, we talk to, folks that have kind of come through the other side, the survivors, people that have, been trapped in this. When you look at the demand side, as you say, what are some things that maybe our viewers would be most fascinated by when it comes to this issue?
Well, I think when it comes to the demand side, it's really about looking at what big brands are doing in this space. So there's been a lot of work and a spotlight, particularly on those more visible consumer goods and services, for example, around the production of chocolate or coffee or tea, or even fashion. So the issue of fast fashion. So the spotlight has been over the last 20 years on those kind of product goods and services that individual consumers buy. And so actually with that spotlight is then putting pressure on some of these big brands, particularly in the fashion and the chocolatiers, to actually do something significant to address human rights violations throughout the supply chain.
And what does the protocol look like?
The protocol for that is mixed, obviously. So, for example, we have what we would call soft legislation, which has been put together by the United Nations. So we have things like the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 goals which address a range of social impact areas, not just human rights violations, but a whole range of issues. And we also have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which is another soft legislation encouraging the business community to do more. So we, at that level, of that international level, there's soft legislation to encourage government and corporations to take these matters seriously, and to take reasonable steps to address these issues. And these soft laws, if you like, are being transformed into hard laws in different parts of our world. So different legislation is popping up all over the place to actually work with government, corporations, and the civil society to actually address these issues more concretely.
So how would that look like in the United States of America? Do you have any insider guidance on how we could streamline what you guys are doing or replicate in any way? It sounds effective.
Well, in the United States, you do have a piece of legislation in the state of California, for example, has a Supply Chain and Transparency Act, which was brought in 2010, which requires organizations to publish on their website steps that they're taking to identify the risk of forced labor, for example, in the goods and services. So that's definitely at a state level. Overall, there is the Trafficking in Persons report, which is put out by the Department of State, which benchmarks all the countries in the world in terms of what they're actually doing. You have lots of different organizations in the United States who are doing all sorts of things, particularly around survivor care. And the United States has also made an amendment to their customs processes to actually ban the importation and limit the importation of products made in Xinjiang province in China, where there are accusations and allegations of forced labor in that region.
Now, as you mentioned, you've been involved in this line of work for a long time. What was it that drew you to this? Like, what was the impetus that you said, this is my fight, this is my mission?
Well, I approach this from a faith perspective. So my trade, if you like, is as a Christian pastor. So that was sort of my conviction, arose out of that faith conviction in and of itself, that which led to an exploration of the issue, particularly looking at the issues around what's going on for men and women and children in the line of sex trafficking, for example. So that's where it all started. Because that was also a very big focus, particularly in the late 1990s and early 2000s, looking at what's actually going on in light of the UN protocols of trafficking. So that's where it sort of started. And it's one of these issues where once you start, you can't stop, kind of like a Pringle, you get in and you you get sort of hooked, and the deeper you go, the more issues you see, the more opportunities, more challenges, and it's something that you can't walk away from. It's something I couldn't walk away from. So just going down this path, it's not something that I imagined that I would do when I was a teenager. Going down this path and actually seeing that I can't escape. I can't live in a world where there's slavery. I can't live in a world where people are oppressed at this level, and I need to do everything I can to actually be part of this. Not that I'm the big problem solver, but I'm a link in the chain. That's how I see myself. I'm a little link in the chain of people doing good things in the space.
Yeah, I really like that you don't feel like you just have to accept the way things are, and your tenacity. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't want to step on your toes, Amanda, but I was going to say, because you sparked something in my head when you said the word inspire, because it's one thing to get people to, do the right thing or to inspire them to make changes, but it's another thing for corporations to, kind of be led to do the right thing. So what are some of the challenges that you've kind of faced on that side of the ledger?
Oh, I think there are lots of challenges for organizations who are hired at times behind a whole, say, gamut of compliance legislation. So this, so we have, for example, in Australia, what we call the Modern Slavery Act. So it's a legislation similar to the Supply Chain Transparency Act. It's actually a bit stronger. And part of the approach in that is, companies need to take the right steps to first of all identify risk and then take steps to take responsibility. So we're looking at two words. We're looking at being transparent as much as possible and then take responsibility. It's a big challenge for organizations to be transparent. Now there's lots of challenges in there around transparency, around risk, because there's risk around reputation, legal, financial risks that they need to take into consideration. So all those kind of reputational pieces around risk and transparency need to be worked through, and companies need to get comfortable in this age of reporting and transparency to actually to state what's going on, which could have lots of implications for shareholders and investments and all sorts of things. So getting comfortable with risk and actually being transparent is a big problem, but the bigger problem is taking responsibility. So it's one thing you might think it's a problem being transparent. It's another problem actually being transparent about what you're doing to actually address these issues, and issues around grievance and remediation, and working collaboratively with suppliers, with civil society organizations. None of this can be done overnight. This is about setting long-term goals, setting reasonable targets, KPIs, seeing the investment in people, in money, in personnel. This is going to take a long time, and so this all takes strategy and planning, and organizations come into this space not knowing exactly what they're doing, and it takes them a long while to sort that out.
And congratulations for starting a new position as member board of directors at Slave Trade International. And with that, what is modern slavery?
Sure. Well, for me, there's two ways of looking at of this. One is slavery in the most acute form is the removal or the restriction of someone's voice, choice, and movement. So when a person has no options, they have no opportunities, they can't speak out, they're not getting paid, they're limited in a social and economic way, and perhaps they're even controlled psychologically. This is a case of slavery. This is removed a lot from, say, more traditional or historic forms of slavery. Modern slavery, there's a lot more around sort of socioeconomic, cultural, and psychological control over a person. So that's kind of one way of looking at it. Slavery and modern slavery then is being used by the United Kingdom and the Australian governments and other jurisdictions to capture a range of human rights violations that are sort of different faces, if you like, of slavery. So forced labor, debt bondage, forced marriage, human trafficking, extreme forms of child labor, domestic servitude, and slavery itself. So it's kind of then becomes an umbrella term for around modern slavery.
Have you come across in your line of work people who are just unaware that they're engaged in modern slavery tactics and like just need to become informed that of what it is to then possibly disengage?
Well, I think we're all implicated.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we buy something, we are implicated. So every time we purchase a product and source a product from a part of the world, say Southeast Asia, or raw materials from the Democratic Republic of Congo, every time we buy a phone, a computer, we have no awareness of who's made these products, where they're being made, and the extent to which people are being exploited in the production or the production of products and the sourcing materials. So I meet people all the time, including myself. I'm implicated.
Mm-hmm.
This is my issue. I need the awareness, and getting the awareness and being consistent with that is actually also part of the challenge for the individual. It's very difficult to be sustainable. Very, very difficult. Our whole global economic system is not set up for sustainability. We need to actually develop our own strategies to think through, when I buy this product, what is the environmental impact? What is the impact? What's the social impact? What's the economic impact of this product? And that takes a lot of serious living, and who wants to live that seriously?
Yeah, but it's a very serious problem. I mean, I'm glad you're organizing it. You know, it's I feel like it's something that hasn't really been discussed.
Yeah, and Amanda knows I'm smiling because I literally bought a laptop this morning. And so, yes, as much as we try to be conscious, you're right, doctor, it is so hard to kind of cut yourself off from anything that is associated with this modern slavery.
Well, exactly. Save not buying anything and setting up your own hobby farm and growing your own things. I mean, we all participate. To participate is to consume. That's been quoted by many people, but to participate in modern life is to consume. And if you can't consume, you can't participate. And to consume means to be able to spend money. So this is how we've been orientated, and we need to start thinking about other ways, other modes of living, and valuing life apart from my individual capacity to consume, and to consume as much as possible.
Okay.
So that's getting philosophical now. So we might need to shift gears.
I mean, I think that's nice. I think that's insightful because as human beings, we're just in a hamster wheel, like trying to eat our meal, get in 3 meals a day. Like there's not time in the day for your everyday being to think about all of this. That they're just trying to get by. Excited to get home from work, and so it's an important issue, and like highlighting the expectations when you're developing a product and is helpful and will reshape the future.
Yeah, that's right. And you might think, well, it's hopeless, I can't win because I'm part of this ecosystem that works against me and I can't do anything. But there are things that we can do, and I think part of the strategy for individuals is to start, even for organizations, is to start small, to come up with a clear goal of what you want to achieve in the next month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 5 years. Set the parameters around what impact areas you want to focus on, because you can't focus on anything because there's infinite number of issues to focus on. When it comes to individuals, to think, okay, I'm going to start in the kitchen. Let's just start in the kitchen. Okay, so what's in my fridge? What's in my pantry? What can I actually do? Or maybe go to my bedroom, go to my wardrobe, and think, okay, what are the clothes that I'm buying, and how can I do some research around the brands? What can I do to engage those brands, to ask them more questions, to research actually what they're doing, and what I've done and tried to do is actually create my own little pod of brands. These are the 6 brands that I buy from, because I know, and they cover the range of kind of clothes that I need to buy. And this is what I limit myself to, so that I engage with those brands and encourage them, because no brand is perfect. So brands make, even responsible brands excel in different areas. So what can we do to, in a sense, limit the brands, limit my spending, and focus on how I can engage those brands more constructively.
And so that's creating a world made in freedom. Is that where that comes from? Okay.
Yeah, that's a world made in freedom, and a world in which I can participate constructively and not just give in because the world is set up in a way and I can't do anything about it.
So is that your definition of what is your definition of the world made in freedom? Is it beyond? So I'm looking at slave free trade, what we spoke about earlier, and I just want to make sure that the audience understands what we're talking about here. So it's, we want to ensure that all of the everyday items we buy as consumers, food, clothing, shoes, makeup, coffee, and more, are created by workers free from human rights abuses. That's major. If the United States adopted this model, it would be a transformed country. I don't think that the United States is capable,
Well, I'm not saying it's easier. That's why I'm saying I'm not, I'm just a little link in the chain. Okay. I'm not Superman. I'm not trying to I'm just doing my bit. Okay. But I am saying, we're looking at, we want to make sure that people have proper contracts, because this is a risk area when people don't have the correct contractual arrangements. We want to make sure people have the opportunity to speak out, to form a union or to a syndicate. They actually have a voice. So we want to restore the voice and give people a voice. We want to make sure that people are not, their identity is not taken away from them. So their documents and their passports aren't removed so that they can't actually move around and live freely. We want to make sure that people have a living wage. Not everyone can live on the wage of a person. I think with one of the highest countries, they say Luxembourg, for example. No, we don't. It's not about actually having wages which are disproportionate to the economy of the country, but it's about actually making sure that people have the opportunity to do what they need to do, that their children can go to school and be educated, that they can actually exercise their rights and participate as in their communities and not be limited or by the fact that they have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to get by, and therefore they're actually limited in terms of their own political participation or their participation in the public square. So there's all sorts of indicators which go into, which make up a case of modern slavery. And what we want to try and do is actually create conditions in which people can actually participate freely, just as you and I are participating freely at this point.
I'm wondering if you've noticed any change or if any differentiation in modern slavery over the past few years, where we've had this global event that has affected folks in different ways, but also a lot of us in common ways. Have you noticed anything differently in terms of the way that companies are addressing these issues, or in the ways that people are becoming aware of, oh yeah, like there are people out here who are hurting that we never knew were hurting?
You're in reference to the pandemic?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah, look, if anything, it's got worse. So a
Mhm.
recent report by the International Labour Organization has shifted the number, which is an estimate, I think a conservative estimate actually, from 40 million people, say back in 2016-18, to now we're up to 50 million people.
Oh,
Mm.
wow. And what about children?
And
What about children working as child labor or businesses
well, that,
admitting
yeah,
to human rights abuses? Did that go up significantly as well? And if by the same in alignment with the workers?
well, I think the full extent and the full fallout from the pandemic is yet to be realized, and it's still
Mhm.
being worked out. So, for example, well, there were situations, for example, when companies shut down their offshore operations in parts of India or Philippines, for example, then that then immediately puts people at risk of poverty and potential debt bondage, because when people lose their jobs, not everyone, for example, has the same opportunities, the same kind of safety net that we had
Right.
here in Australia, for example. If you lose your job, then you have no money, and then you might need to borrow money, and to borrow money puts you at risk of then a loan shark, and you might then need to have to pay an interest rate that you can't actually pay off the loan because it's at 50%, for example. And then in light of that, then you find yourself in forced labor in order to pay off the debt, and it continues. So I think we're yet to see the full extent of all this, in terms of how this has worked out in different parts of our world. But it has, put the spotlight on, some of the impacts of the pandemic. For example, when the pandemic and the first sort of round of lockdowns occurred back in April 2020, some $3 billion worth of orders were either cancelled or suspended overnight just in the apparel sector. And basically that just shut down factories and people having to leave work, which immediately has an impact on their families. And they might be in a situation where they have to put their children forward to work because they now need to work at a cheaper rate than before. So I don't think the full extent and the full story has yet to be realized, as governments have, in a sense, internalized, focusing on their own domestic needs, controlling people, in terms of the movement of people. The focus has shifted more to internal survival, really, than working out really what's the impact of this in other parts of our world.
Mm.
The international human rights law progressed going through a global pandemic where we're all experiencing something at the same time? Or do you think it was helpful or detrimental?
Do you have any? Are you thinking? I mean, do you have any laws in particular, or?
Well, there's I know, like, I don't know. I see there's 10 principles for decent work. I don't know if that's something that that pertains solely, if that solely pertains to international human rights law, or just what your broad definition was of international human rights law, and aspirations or hope for it. Hopes for
I
it.
think there's this distinction between soft and hard laws. So soft laws being, legislation or rulings or principles. Guiding principles is probably the best word. So principles which are articulated by the United Nations. We consider these soft laws because they have to, in a sense, be adopted by individual countries. There's no forced mandate. There's nothing binding on countries to do things. So these are principles. So the Sustainable Development Goals, or the guiding principles on business and human rights. These remain, and I think probably what the pandemic has done is probably shifted our focus in terms of how this works out within corporations themselves. When we look at the dynamic between flexible work arrangements and virtual work, or all these kind of sort of internal domestic issues that have arisen from a human resource or people and culture perspective, has in a sense shifted our focus a little bit more in terms of what's going on internally within organizations, rather than necessarily what's going on in the supply chain. So I think when it comes to addressing human rights violations within supply chains, I think there continues to be efforts there to address this issue, but I think the focus has and the energy has shifted more domestically and internally within organizations to address their own dynamics around how do people work now in this new environment? How do we facilitate flexible work arrangements? Whereas before, for many organizations, there was no possibility. You can't work from home. There's no principle around what you can't work from home. You have to come into the office. But now all of a sudden, we know you can work from home. And now we're not. And now we're probably seeing a shift back to no. You now need to come back to the office. So this shifts the focus.
And because I feel like it's an opportunity to connect with the pandemic was also an opportunity to connect with other countries, more professional Zoom sessions with individuals in Australia and the United States of America. How would that look, and why aren't we doing that? I don't see, to me it makes perfect sense, to have like interdisciplinary work in an interdisciplinary platform, learn from each other, work on our give from our strengths, receive from where our weaknesses are. There's just so many advantages to working in collaboration.
There are. I mean, I had one of my team is from Brazil, and for about 8 months, there was a window of time for them to travel back to Sao Paulo and be with their family. It had been home for 5 years. And it was kind of like, well, yeah, go, like, do it. Like, this is the window, this is the time. But they worked from Sao Paulo, which is 14 hours behind. The time difference between Sao Paulo and Sydney is 14 hours. But we made that work, and it wasn't that they didn't want to work. We just made it work that, when it was the morning here, it was the evening there, and we had that flexible work arrangement. And I think maybe perhaps, with the use of technology and the virtual space and maybe even the metaverse, then there will be more opportunities to work with people in different parts of our world, and not just work just locally, for example.
You mentioned earlier that you are a link on a chain, and I think one thing that maybe somebody in our audience might be wondering is, how do I help? I'm just one person, or I'm just one organization. How do you feel groups need to work, maybe interconnectedly, or what is the game plan? Like, if I gave you the Superman cape that you talked about earlier, what would you do to get people to work together and be able to fully address this issue worldwide?
Sure. I think there's lots of things that people could do, both voluntarily or even in a paid position. For example, there's been a rise, and I'm not sure what it's like in the United States, but I know in Australia there's been a rise in the number of university degrees, for example, that look or address human rights or sustainability. So it's about, there's things that people can do now to get more educated and more skilled in the space, and so they can participate more effectively within organizations and do things at an organizational level. There's endless amounts of scope to work with the civil society, not-for-profits, NGOs, endless things around raising funds, raising awareness, advocacy, volunteering, both volunteering, say in the country where the NGO may be working, but even from the home base to actually raise awareness. So there's lots of ways in which people can get involved in different organizations, and they would have their own process of actually upskilling you to be more effective in that kind of work. Coming back to a previous point around just having your own personal strategy around this, and perhaps you do that in collaboration with others, that you actually form your own kind of cohort, your own group to actually be sustainable, because you can't, all this needs to happen collaboratively. You can't necessarily do this individually. So to change communities, change your own local community. This is lobby your own local government area. We want to be a much more sustainable town or city or whatever it is. So there's lots of different groups that people can plug into, both in a volunteer capacity or even getting upskilled and working at a paid capacity to actually get involved.
And I think it would be also helpful, like if we could support a movement or an initiative, or like being green, just something like something quick and easy, that so everybody's on board and all right, we're making this transition, we're doing it. These are brands worth investing in, and
That's right. Yeah.
mhm. Is
Yeah.
there
And make use
anything
there's
like that going on, or that we
yeah, I
could,
mean there
share from country to country? Is there anything floating around?
yes, I mean, for example, there are applications that are out there. Good on You, for example, is one app that
Mm.
you can use, which actually provides, I think, basically just three main criteria of how a brand is functioning. So you can actually engage with that kind of platform,
Okay.
provide your own insights, and actually use the tools that they provide to engage with a brand. So not be afraid to actually engage with a brand. I mean, they need your dollars. They need they need your custom. So
Hmm.
don't be afraid to reach out and work with others. And some of these organizations we have here at Baptist World Aid, which has their own fashion report and fashion guide. So again, you can actually uh, collaborate with them, and they'll send you collateral, a letter or a postcard or something to write to those organizations. So, or you can just reach out
Oh
to
yeah.
those organizations yourself. So there's a lot that can be done. There's different movements out there, and any number of NGOs that are out there doing work that have their own advocacy arm to actually collaborate with and partner with.
Nice. I just had my final question, and I'm sure Nate might have more, but what kind, and it's kind of we're changing directions a little bit, but what kind of issues are um illegal? Okay, how easy or hard is the immigration to Australia? What kind of issues illegal and slave trade happen?
I'm not an expert on immigration, so I just want to put a caveat there. So, I mean, immigration to Australia is has its many levels of complexity. Not probably to the extent that maybe with the United States and its southern neighbours, for example, or even in Europe with its southern and eastern neighbours as well. So we don't have the same volume of people trying to get coming into Australia. However, we do have our own issues around how we treat asylum seekers and refugees, which I'm not an expert in, so I just don't want to say too much there in terms of my opinion, because it's not my area of expertise. However, we do. There's lots of anecdotal evidence around the treatment and the poor treatment of people who do come here, particularly who might be low skilled immigrants coming for the harvest to pick fruit, for example, in the agriculture sector. And we also know there's risks in Australia here around the treatment of international students and their experience and the types of risks that they experience, particularly around the pandemic. There was a report that was generated a year or so ago now, looking at the way in which international students were kind of restricted or suffered during the pandemic because they weren't able to access government help during the pandemic. And so therefore they had to, first of all, they didn't have the money to return home. Second of all, they then had to accept lower pay for jobs, for casual jobs, and also rent and accommodation, which was less than satisfactory. So there are lots of issues. Yeah, there's lots of anecdotal information here around in terms of the treatment of people in the sex work industry, for example, agriculture, construction, and yeah, that's probably the extent. I've met some of those people, for example, in terms of the things that they've suffered, but in terms of the overall immigration policy in Australia, that's not something I can speak to confidently this morning.
And my final question for you, because you've been very generous with your time today, we appreciate the conversation. But earlier I asked you about the beginning, of the journey. What got you into this mission. So I guess the last question I'll leave you with, Doctor, is 12 years later. what keeps you going? What gets you up in the morning to, speak to these corporations? What gets you up in the morning to hop on a computer and talk to hosts in America about the work that you do? What is it that keeps you going?
I'm completely driven and focused and loyal. I'm very loyal to what I do. So it's not hard for me to get up in the morning and get on with it. That doesn't say that every day is perfect and it's all fantastic. But I kind of, at times I embody resilience. So I just I persevere through a lot of things. And I think just what drives me is my own faith conviction, and that's matched through the kind of work that I'm engaged in, the people that's surrounded with. I meet people all the time. Every week I'm meeting people and talking about this issue, and I see lots of obviously there's lots of gaps and there's lots of problems, but there's also lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, but there's lots of ways in which people can be more innovative for creativity, for the use of technology, for partnerships, for collaboration. And so I that's what energizes me is actually stepping into those opportunities and partnering with people and seeing where the synergy is and where we can work together. And I think that piece alone keeps me engaged in this issue, because I know that there are people at work in this space. It's not a lost cause. We don't have to just give in to the way things are. We can actually do our bit, and if we do our bit and we're consistent with it and we're focused, and I like to say, and stay in my lane. If I stay in my lane, okay, and do the thing that I know that I need to do, and that other people are doing this here and there, and I don't need to do everything, because if I try and do everything, I'm going to fall apart in a big heap and have some sort of breakdown. Okay, so I just need to stay in my lane, do the thing that I know that I need to do it well, and be open and partner with others who are working alongside me, who I can collaborate with and partner with, trusting and supporting what they're doing as well, but just doing what I know I can do, and with what's within my power, my resources, my level of intelligence, faith, whatever it is, to actually do something constructive.
Yes. And we should absolutely keep in touch. And if you have any insight further down the line about how we can better be productive, and because you are a role model, I aspire your work ethic, and wish our country was a little more like you. So it's been really nice chatting and getting to know you, and I hope we can continue the conversation in the future, and just check in and see how things are doing, and we can update you as well on any progress we've made, or if there's any way we can support you and your please just let us know.
Sure. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Nat. I think just I think the main thing is to start small, and set a goal for yourself and commit to it. That's really where it all begins.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Great. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.